March 1945 off Okinawa. Night haze pressing low over black water as Hayashi steadies the brass wheel and feels the knurled bite against his fingertips, the optical bars kissing and parting on a vague shoreline that refuses to stay still. Tools speak. First, the soft churr of a range drum detent, a sound-powered key clicking once, breath held in fours, fixation under 2 seconds per sweep, and the numbers arrive clean, whole, respectable. Bearing, elevation, deflection. He writes them by habit, while hot oil and faint ozone thread the air, and the deck hums with readiness that feels almost moral. Precision is supposed to make the world honest. That is the oath in his chest. Keep the picture pure. Trust the eye win with the first exact solution. The silence comes small and wrong, not long, just off a missing syllable in the voice circuit where the next report should live. Pressure arrives before sound, walking through steel and ribs, and the bulkhead shivers as if the ship has inhaled too sharply. White towers of water stand where no muzzle flash was seen. He tastes metal and counts again, but the count will not hold. The stopwatch ticks, and somewhere beyond the horizon a schedule he did not set keeps perfect time. Another wall of air passes through him, and the deck and the wheel under his palm feels ceremonial, a relic being turned while decisions are made elsewhere by cadence. He forces the eye back to the stadier lines and chases beauty, the perfect correction, the elegant fall of shot, but the field is being erased in timed pulses that do not care about elegance. The pencil scratches, corrects again. He hears the ship itself counting in simple repetitions that do not miss. A flinch betrays the core fear he has never named. His left hand lets the wheel go for a heartbeat when the deck flexes before the boom, as if cause has reversed, and the rulebook has become superstition. A fragment floats across the battle from the unseen enemy, not as poetry but as a work order. Keep the clock, keep the feed, let radar set the rhythm. He understands the miscalculation without drama. The duel he trained for is not a duel at all. Cadence beats elegance. They laughed at the noise first. American machines shout to hide their clumsiness. An old captain told the wardroom, tapping the range table as if good manners could win a war. He called the big turrets factories bolted to decks run by men who preferred levers to judgment. The room enjoyed the line. It confirmed that quiet optics and a calm director crew were the mark of civilization. But the sea did not care about wit, and the schedule coming off the American line did not blush. What sounded like racket was cadence measured in seconds, not pride measured in adjectives. The arithmetic lived in hours and tons. Each main battery projectile weighed near a metric ton, once steel, explosive, filler and copper driving bands were counted, and powder bags stacked to push it reached tens of kilograms per gun per shot. The loading cycle ran roughly 1 to 2 rounds per minute per gun, under battle conditions, 9 guns beating like a metronome when the ship's magazines and hoists kept faith. That is 9 to 18 heavy shells per minute from one hull each, with powder that had to be mixed, bagged, moved and delivered without a pause. Multiply by hours on station, and the figure turns from drama to logistics, dozens of projectiles per hour per ship, then hundreds. When a division keeps the line hot, steel moves by the ton, decisions move with it. Labor explains the confidence. Turrets were not temples, they were workflows. Thousands of labor hours went into machining each barrel, and thousands more into the hoists, rammers, and safety interlocks that made speed survivable. In dockyards that ran in 3 shifts, steel plate arrived by the trainload measured in hundreds of tons per day, and powder plants output propellant in tons per week, with test lots tracked like blood types so that stability and burn rate stayed inside narrow limits. When parts wore replacements existed on shelves already gauged, already oiled, already documented. Availability was not a miracle. It was a promise kept by clerks, welders, crane operators, and sailors who treated time as the scarce commodity. The rhythm did not come from eyesight alone. Radar directors, fixed range, and bearing without asking the horizon for permission, freeing the ship from weather and glare and smoke. The plotting teams in the Combat Information Center fused tracks, voice nets, and timing, turning what used to be a craftsman's pause into a scheduled next act. Corrections that once required a perfect glimpse now arrived as numbers on repeatable intervals, so the next salvo could be sent before the previous splash finished speaking. Civilians had taught much of this laboratories that tuned cavities, and Klystrons universities that built waveguides and test stands, factories that learned to stamp precision into metal at scale. The line between a city power plant and a battleship turret was smaller than pride wanted to admit. Both were systems that turned inputs into output on time. Mockery died where data lived. If a ship sustains one salvo every 30 to 40 seconds across 9 guns for an hour, the battery delivers on the order of 1,000 projectiles, weighing hundreds of tons. Combined mass and pushes blast energy into the shore by the tuckus, gigajoule. The fuel burnt to keep that schedule is counted in tons per day. The refrigerants that keep powder cool are measured in liters per hour. The men rotated through positions in minutes to prevent fatigue error. Nothing about that is elegant in the salon sense. Everything about it is reliable in the operational sense. The officer who loved perfect solutions could still admire a tight ladder of splashes, a correction that walks onto a target like a dancer finding the mark. But the war had moved to a different stage. The winner was the system that could guarantee the next round on time while keeping barrels within wear limits, magazines within temperature limits, and crews within human limits. The winner was the schedule that did not break when one hoist jammed because another path existed, and a petty officer knew how to reroute the flow. Availability outperformed perfection because perfection waits for the moment, and availability creates it. They begin the drill the way it was taught, the way it always worked when the sea allowed a duel. Hayashi sets the director to the first solution with the confidence of a man who has practiced this arc thousands of times. Range is taken, deflection is set, elevation walks in half-degree steps. The first ladder lands close, the second walks true, the third kisses the shoreline where a battery had just flashed. It is technically beautiful, the kind of correction that used to draw a murmur in a wardroom. The spotting team calls clean the voice tubes, carry numbers like prayer beads, and for a breath he feels the old certainty that precision drives events. Then, cadence arrives from nowhere and everywhere at once. A wall of pressure passes before the sound. The deck flexes, and the shoreline answers in timed pulses that do not wait for his next perfect call. Salvos land on schedule with a tempo that feels inhuman, not fast for the sake of speed, but regular in a way that erases initiative. Radar is keeping time for them. He can sense it in the way each impact arrives, just as the last spray collapses, as if a metronome offstage is steering steel. He corrects again. He is correct again. It does not matter. The target battery ceases to be a battery and becomes a smear of moving dust. The art is intact. The purpose evaporates. He tries to steal back agency with finesse. He holds fire through a beat, trying to read the faintest cue, waiting for the enemy cadence to falter to show a seam. The break he needs never comes. A fresh set of splashes walks ashore, and then the escort screen begins to speak in its own rhythm. Air bursts blossom above the waterline with no visible shells to precede them. Proximity fuses judging distance, with a kind of impersonal intimacy that sight cannot contest. A cutter that had dared a little too near reels under shrapnel that arrives like rain trained to hate. He thinks to mark the fuse timing and immediately realizes there is nothing to mark. The timing is the system itself. Mirror scene holds for one more exchange. He directs a counter-battery solution with textbook economy 2, ranging rounds, 1 correction, then a short salvo, intended to scissor a gun position caught between blasts. The splashes step in with satisfying order. A flash winks out. He should feel triumph. Instead, he tastes the edge of failure. Because in the seconds required to do it right, the shoreline changes shape again, under a new American pulse, and the opening his craft created is filled by volume before it can be exploited. Precision has turned from a blade to a time cost. Metric by metric, the truth shows through. Ammunition is a breath count. Powder bags are minutes of life. The magazine steward calls up a figure that makes his mouth dry. At this rate, the hour will eat a quota meant for a day. Rate of fire is a heartbeat, and his own heart begins to sink to the wrong drum. He hears the ship counting in the simple language of repeatability, while he counts in the elaborate language of excellence, and the numbers refuse to meet in the middle. He pushes for a daring correction at longer range, hoping dispersion will mask the rhythm and give him a pocket of silence. Radar ignores the plea. Cadence does not care about romance. The next broadside arrives with the same measured stride, and the escort's bursts throw invisible nets that make the very idea of a clean window feel naive. Voice circuits clip under blast. A junior officer stammers not from fear of steel, but from hatred of being late to a clock he cannot see. In the spaces between shock, he feels what is actually being taken from him. It is not just ground, it is the luxury of waiting for beauty. Every pause to polish a solution is now a gift to the other side's schedule. Every perfectly judged spot is a coin sunk into water already moving the other way. He had always believed discipline conserved resources. Today, discipline spends them. The more exact he becomes, the more minutes he pours into a hopper that rewards only arrival. He tries once more to catch cadence with elegance, to turn a precise 3-round ladder into control. The ladder is perfect. Control belongs to the ship he cannot see, whose salvos keep time with a radar that never blinks and magazines that never seem to run dry. Proximity bursts stitch the air, and the escort's own rhythm fences off the approach lanes so thoroughly that even courage feels wasteful. He lowers his voice to keep it steady and writes one last correction he knows is right. The target has already changed. The pencil line looks like a relic. What he feels leaving him is not skill. It is usefulness draining out of him in powder units and minutes. Discipline has become the cost paid to watch abundance do the work. The blast arrives like a verdict pressure, before sound a shove through steel that buckles the breath and makes the voice circuit stutter. He has learned to ride shocks to separate fear from information, but this one is layered and insistent, a drumline that refuses to lose the count. The shoreline blurs into a low brown cloud. The sea turns white in stitched rectangles. The bulkhead answers with a soft groan that feels like the ship asking for mercy. He reaches for the old comfort and finds nothing there. The brass wheel that once felt like a judge's gavel now feels like a relic from a gentler war. He knows what the oath requires. Hold range, guard elevation, spend powder on proof, not on noise. Keep the picture pure until the perfect solution cuts clean. The oath is a creed about cause and effect, about sight granting control. It has held him steady since his first day under a hood, with the stadia lines trembling and a petty officer whispering counts. He can almost hear that instructor now urging discipline through the thumps. But the rhythm on the far side does not hesitate or bargain. Salvos arrive on a schedule, not a feeling. Between one wall of air and the next, the truth cracks open. The eye has no vote in a fight kept by clock. He leans toward his talker and gives an order that tastes like rust. Close the range, give up the long, elegant solution, and move to a distance where magazines and hoists, not optics, can keep the guns speaking without pause. It is a small phrase, a few ordinary words, and it feels like betrayal. The team hesitates for a heartbeat because they know him. They know what he believes. Then the acknowledgements ripple out on the net, and the ship turns a few degrees. Not much, just enough to step into a cruder geometry. He finds himself speaking in shorter sentences, dropping the flourishes that once proved mastery. Fire to keep time, not to carve beauty. Fire because the other side fires and the schedule is the battlefield. Shock sound rises as range falls, a physical crescendo that wipes out the human tick of waiting for the perfect moment. His left hand lets the wheel go again for that single shameful beat when pressure arrives before thunder, and he hates the gesture even as he cannot stop it. He watches his own training retreat in the glass. The ladder he would have walked in 3 neat steps becomes a blunt push. The spot he would have adored becomes a number pushed across the net at the proper second. He hears his own voice asking for rate, not for grace. He knows exactly what that means. He is asking the ship to become what he mocked, a factory bolted to a keel. The first correction at the new range looks ugly on paper. Dispersion will be coarse. The climb and drop will scuff the edges of the plot. He sends it anyway and forces the next order in before habit can protest. Keep the interval. Do not wait for the splash to finish telling its story. Send, then see. Send, then see. The crew responds with a relief he did not expect. Young men prefer rules they can meet. When the blasts roll back across them, he realizes the relief is theirs and the shame is his. The thing he kept like a shrine has been heavy on their backs for months. The enemy rhythm does not break, it shifts to match. Another broadside arrives with that same detached stride, and the escorts stitch the approach lanes with airbursts that feel personal, without ever showing a face. He tries one last time to catch them with finesse, a small angular cheat that would once have bought a silent beat against an optical opponent. Radar ignores artistry. The counter he offers is a note in a song that is already underway, and the song does not need him to be pretty to remain fatal. He does not announce it, but he surrenders a second oath tucked inside the first. He stops hunting for the spot that would prove him right, and starts hunting for the next second that keeps his side inside the pulse. He writes orders like a metronome, short and plain. He forces himself to ignore a perfect sight picture because it would break the cadence to admire it. He feels the loss like a pulled tooth, all nerve. The craft he built in thousands of hours has not become false. It has become irrelevant under this pressure, and the discovery burns hotter than fear. A junior officer on the voice circuit mispronounces a number when the deck flexes, then corrects, then keeps the interval. That small act is the lesson. The system forgives a stumble as long as the beat returns before the next salvo lands. There is mercy here, but it belongs to machinery and process, not to talent. He had measured his worth by the elegance of his solution. The battle now measures him by whether he can keep men and steel inside a counting scheme set by an adversary with deeper magazines and unblinking sensors. It is not a duel, it is a race with rails. Another pressure wall moves through his ribs and leaves a taste of oil in his mouth. He hears a gun captain's chant from far below, a steady litany of checks that sounds like prayer until you hear the arithmetic under it. He presses the talk key and tells them to maintain the interval even if the splash is late in the eye. The words land like stones in his throat. He meant for years to be the man who refused to turn war into a schedule. Now he is building the schedule with his own voice because the alternative is to be erased by one. The shame of it is exact. It does not shout. It sits behind the teeth and waits. The next sequence runs cleaner, uglier, truer. He no longer looks for beauty in the water. He looks for continuity in the air between blasts. The ship answers him with a steadier stride. The pencil lines on his plot lose their calligraphy and keep their meaning. He understands at last why the other side never pauses. Pausing feeds the clock you do not control. He lowers his head and accepts the wound that cannot be bandaged by rank or rhetoric. The craft is still noble. The craft does not decide this fight. What decides it is cadence enforced by radar and supplied by men who treat minutes like ammunition. He keeps giving the orders that break his oath, because they keep his crew alive inside the pulse. He imagines for a moment telling his instructor that he learned to value ugly truth over beautiful theory. The imagined face looks back without anger, only with a tired knowledge all teachers carry. He closes his eyes for the length of one breath, opens them, and rides the next shock without letting go of the wheel. The shame remains. So does the schedule. The compartment is warm and smells of hot oil and paint, and a sweetness that might be cordite lingering in seams. He waits for the last tremor to drain from the steel, then lays his fingertips on a torn plate the size of a hand, a shallow crater pressed into armor, where something fast met something stubborn and left a memory. The metal is not sharp. It is dimpled and smooth at the rim, as if the ship has already begun to heal around the wound. His thumb follows the curve and comes away with a grey smear that looks like pencil lead. He tries to decide whether this mark belongs to the enemy or to the ship herself, and then understands that the question has lost meaning. Impact and recovery now live in the same place. The wheelhouse is quieter than he expects. Voices carry without hurry. Somewhere aft, a pump knocks in a steady beat, like a heart pretending not to be tired. He breathes through the taste of oil and watches a drip gather at a seam, hesitate, and fall exactly in time with a distant clank. Rhythm has entered everything. He knows he brought it here with his own orders. That knowledge is the first part of the confession, though he has not yet found the words. On a small table, someone has laid two objects side by side. One is a range book thick with penciled ladders and tidy corrections, the cover creased in the way of a prayer book thinned by years of hands. The other is a maintenance log printed with columns that do not care for adjectives. He opens his book and feels the pride that once came simply from the geometry. He has recorded perfect walks onto targets, clean ladders that step with grace, small triumphs in neat script. He closes it and opens the other. Hours, parts, intervals, inspections, powder temperatures in tidy ranges, barrel wear measured in patient decimals, hoist cycles counted like breaths. He is surprised by the calm that comes from the second book. It asks nothing but continuity. It forgives small error, as long as the next entry arrives on time. He sets both down and returns to the scar. The ship gives him the true comparison he has avoided speaking aloud. Symbol against symbol, faith against faith. On one side, the eye, the lens, the elegant moment when the fall of shot speaks like a teacher, and the hand answers with an exact stroke. On the other side, a platform with space for powder by the stack and shell by the pallet, a tower of steel whose genius is not finesse, but repeatability. Its mind, a room where radar writes numbers, at a pace a human could never keep without. Help. He has loved the first because it let him feel singular, irreplaceable, an artisan at a bench in a storm. The second denies that romance and replaces it with responsibility. He reaches for language that will not excuse him. In his head, the sentences try to turn poetic, and he refuses them. He wants a tally that anyone could audit. He begins with the heartbeat of the battery. Rate of fire is a pulse. He can name it, he can count it, he can feel it in his bones even now that the guns are quiet. The system that wins is the system that keeps that pulse close to steady while feeding it for as many hours as the task demands. He had once believed a beautifully placed correction was a victory in itself. He sees now that a beautiful correction that steals 2 beats from the schedule is a debt disguised as art. Ammunition is breath. Each bag lifted from a cool locker to a warm hand is a minute of life spent or saved. Each projectile brought to the tray is a promise to a man on a shoreline that the next wall of air will arrive when he expects it. He writes this in his mind as if it were a line in a law. When he chased elegance, he asked his crew to hold their breath for a better moment. When the enemy refused to offer such moments, the held breath became pain that did not buy anything back. He sees again the junior officer mispronouncing a number when the deck flexed, then correcting and keeping the interval. That is the new courage, small and exact, paid out every few seconds with no expectation of applause. He wants to fix the confession to a thing he can touch, so he takes out his pencil and opens the maintenance log and writes in the margin where a clerk will one day frown and then decide to leave it. He writes that the craft remains noble and insufficient. He writes that the enemy's cadence, kept by sensors and fed by a supply chain that treats minutes like cargo, has made mastery of the eye a luxury, not a weapon. He writes that he ordered the range shortened and the pauses erased, and that the ship answered with relief. He writes that he felt shame, and that shame did not matter to the schedule, and that the schedule saved lives that his oath could not have saved. The tally needs a number, even if it is only a frame for the truth. He sketches a simple ratio that his old teacher would recognize for its honesty. Rounds delivered per minute, sustained, multiplied by hours, until the first unavoidable pause set against rounds required to collapse a target's will to act. He does not pretend to know the exact thresholds. He knows enough to see what direction the scale tilts when radar removes guesswork and when spare parts exist before breakdown. In that light, the old promise of the decisive shot shows as a story told to make fear polite. The new promise is uglier and more faithful. Do not stop, do not drift, do not admire. He goes back to the scar one more time and places his palm flat, feeling residual warmth. The metal gives nothing away except the fact that it endured and that men have already begun to make it whole. He thinks of the magazines below the hoists, the screaming quiet of a bearing running true, the way a petty officer will sign a line and then wipe a rag across a face that has learned to belong to a timetable. He thinks of the eye he spent his life training, still sharp, still capable, now a supporting player who owes his best work to a clock. The grief of that demotion sits properly in his chest. He closes the range book and sets it atop the log and leaves both open to the last entries. The 2 volumes look like a single book, now art and arithmetic sharing a spine. He hears a call down the passageway, plain and unhurried, and answers in the same register. The admission is complete not because he has spoken it, but because he has chosen what to touch and what to write. Availability beat perfection. The cost of learning that lesson was measured in breaths and pulses, in bags and shells, in minutes that were wasted as if they were free. He will not waste them again. History will describe it without romance, a change in the grammar of force. Battles once argued by craftsmen at instruments became schedules kept by systems that fused sensors, steel, and supply into a single tempo. The old vocabulary spotting, bracketing, the elegant walk of splashes did not vanish, but it lost authority the moment radar made range a solved problem and logistics made repetition cheap. What counted most was not the beauty of a single correction, but the certainty of the next round arriving on time, and the next after that until will or structure failed. The archive will show it in ledgers more clearly than in memoirs. Hours, tons, intervals, temperatures, wear limits, all converging on an outcome that looks inevitable only after the pipes, hoists, and human shifts have done their quiet work. The man at the center of our story learns this, the way professionals always learn unwelcome truths, by recognizing that the method he loves still works and still loses. He can still read a horizon through glass and coax a precise solution from a trembling line. He can still feel the ship's flex and know how far a shell has fallen short. None of it is false, but its power fades inside a rhythm imposed from beyond eyesight. The cadence does not care about mastery. It asks for continuity. He accepts, finally, that handcrafted excellence cannot dominate a fight whose shape is set by radar timing and by magazines that turn minutes into ammunition. The core fear he would not name becomes plain. The art has not failed, yet it no longer decides. Once admitted, the consequences align. Training shifts toward maintaining interval discipline, damage control, and rapid rerouting when a hoist stalls or a bearing warms. Doctrine reorders prestige, moving some of it from the glass and the range drum to the plotting room and the maintenance bay. The gun captain's perfectionist's pride becomes a team's pride in cycle time, safety margins, and the almost invisible grace of never missing a beat. The most valuable officer is often the one who prevents admiration from stealing a second. Leadership sounds different over a sound-powered circuit. The best voices are calm clocks. Civilian institutions fold into this story with unusual clarity. Laboratories refine microwave cavities and stable oscillators. Factories standardize parts, so tolerances live in crates before they live in steel. Universities produce technicians who think in limits and intervals rather than in feats. The wall between battle line and power plant thins not because war becomes mundane, but because reliability becomes strategic. A fleet able to generate scheduled salvos for hours without hurting itself is a national asset built in peacetime across counties and contracts. The moral weight sits where it should on the decision to spend treasure on availability long before anyone needs it. Set against this is the enduring lure of the decisive shot. It is honest to say that a perfect correction remains thrilling, and that a ladder walked onto a target feels like truth revealing itself. But the archive reminds us that thrill is not an outcome. A position collapses under the steady application of force that cannot be deferred, and the psychology of the defender buckles under knowledge that the next wall of air will arrive when the last one says it will. The sensor frees the shooter from weather and smoke. The supply chain frees the shooter from caution disguised as husbandry. The duel shrinks to a question that brass and paper can answer. Can you keep the beat longer than the other side can stand it? The man writes his confession, where it will be useful in margins near numbers. He calls the winning quantity resource per time and refuses to decorate it. For clarity, he frames it as a product that even a tired clerk can compute from logs, projectiles delivered per minute, sustained, multiplied by hours, sustained before the first unavoidable pause. The unit is simple rounds per minute times hours, and the meaning is large. It is not a theoretical elegance score, it is a capacity to impose rhythm. He writes the letters that fix it in memory RTR, and underlines them only once. Even as a personal ritual restraint matters. Evidence will carry the claim. A ship that delivers one salvo every 30 to 40 seconds across 9 guns sustains a pulse near 1,000 rounds per hour if magazines, crews and wear limits are managed. If the system can hold that for 2 hours before a planned lull for cooling and inspection, the product speaks for itself. If escorts guard the lanes with proximity, bursts that erase approach windows on their own schedule, the defender cannot buy silence with nerve or finesse. He must buy it with a disruption of the cycle, and that is a different kind of problem. The logic is mechanical, and human at once keep the sensors seeing, keep the parts within limits, keep the people rotated and fed. The art becomes the craft of not stopping. Acceptance changes the man more quietly than defeat would. He does not abandon love for the old discipline, he repurposes it. The eye that once chased perfect moments now watches for drift in the beat. The hand that prized a clean ladder now prizes a clean handoff between crews. He speaks less about beauty and more about certainty, less about pride and more about duty, and discovers that the new vocabulary is not smaller, only plainer. Shame remains as it should. It records the cost of learning late, but shame no longer commands him. He carries it as a memory that keeps him honest, while he teaches younger men to keep the count. The larger lesson is not confined to steel. It moves through war as a model. The side that treats time as a consumable and designs to spend it efficiently wins more reliably than the side that treats brilliance as a plan. Sensors that remove doubt, processes that remove delay, parts that remove luck, these defeat doctrine built on the premise that talent can be everywhere at once. The dignity of craft survives as a component in a larger machine built for availability, and history will be kindest to those who built that machine early and maintained it without applause. A careful sentence can close this without flourish. Radar-timed salvos made the schedule the battlefield. Optical precision duels lost authority. The decisive evidence is the resource-per-time ratio projectiles delivered per minute, sustained multiplied by hours sustained before logistic pause. The human consequence is acceptance of irrelevance, followed by revision of doctrine.